Hi there. In this video I'm going to show you how I converted this 1/10 scale Tamiya RC car into the Buzzard vehicle from the film Mad Max Fury Road. So I got the idea to do this conversion from a few years ago whenever I purchased an RC car for my daughter for her birthday. Whenever I was trying to figure out what car to get her, I'd always remembered the Tamiya line of RC cars. So I wanted to get her the lunchbox. But while I was looking on, I think it was eBay I went to, I noticed this. And straight away, as soon as I laid my eyes on it, I was like, my god, that looks just like the, kind of just like the Buzzard vehicle from Fury Road. So obviously, that was it. The idea was buried in my head. I had to do something about it. So I purchased the kit and I sat on it for like a couple of years while I was working on different projects. But when I got my last video finished, I was like, okay, that's it. It's time to get into this project here. So I was really looking forward to doing it, even though it was something very, very, very different from anything I'd done before. But it looked like it would be a lot of fun and I would have like a cool piece to kind of show off at the end of it. I thought at the start that the most challenging parts were going to be the shape of the car, because I know that the body on the Tamiya kit itself, it doesn't quite match up. So I knew that that was going to be a bit of a challenge, but I'd figure a way around it. I also knew that building the interior was going to be a bit of a challenge too, because I wanted to actually have an interior. I wanted to convert this guy here into one of the Buzzard people from the actual film, or at least try and get it as close as I could. But I also knew that one of the biggest challenges, I actually had no idea how big a challenge it would end up being, but I did know that from the very, very start, being able to glue spikes to this that were sturdy enough to be able to actually drive the car around, I knew that was going to be tough. So the first thing that I got into was putting the car itself together. But I realized very, very early on that I should base coat as much as possible at this point. So I just used trusty old Rust-Oleum grey primer, which I use for absolutely everything. And on top of that, then I sprayed just a brown spray. I also attempted to base coat the body. This is where I started to realize that painting and gluing things to the body was going to be much, much harder than I thought. What I noticed after I had put the base coat down was I think I accidentally bumped the body against something and the paint just immediately came off. It just wouldn't stick to it whatsoever. So I wasn't sure if I'd be able to find like a base coat that might suit this type of plastic. More on that in a bit. Oh, by the way, this is probably the tidiest point that you will see this table. It gets much worse later on. Just be warned, okay? Tidiness isn't my thing when it comes to crafting. So, as an experiment, I tried sticking a piece of card that I had cut out. It's just a piece of cardstock. I think it's like 1 or 2 mil thick cardstock. I tried sticking a piece of that to the underside using super glue, of all things, and it didn't remotely stick. Like, it absolutely did not. Now, as something a bit different for the format for this video, I've recorded some audio inserts that I'm going to put here and there. So this is the first one. I hope this makes sense. This is the first time I've ever done an audio insert like this. Ooh, exciting. So basically, when I tried to glue these to the underside here, you can see, hold on a second, I'm recording. Yeah, there we go. See, we're doing all this live. Yeah, when I tried to attach these to here, you can actually see the marks there. Where when I woke up this morning, I went to try and move them and it just peeled the paint off. And I was like, what? Why? Why did I even attempt to try and glue something to resin or to a primer that won't even stick to this material? So, what I've done is I've taken isopropyl alcohol and I've taken off the primer from this part of the car. And I have sanded it. Primer will adhere to that, or a plastic primer, whatever it is that I'm finally going to use, because I think this particular primer is probably not going to cut it. I don't know yet. But it's going to adhere better to a sanded surface, that's for sure. But also, I'm hoping that this epoxy, when I try again now with this, it's going to adhere better to, it's going to bond better with a sanded area. We shall see. So that's what I'm gonna do now, and yeah, catch up with you later, I guess. It didn't work. It was at this point I started to learn about the type of plastic that I was dealing with. because all the glues that I was using, like the extra thin cement and super glues, everything that I was trying wasn't working. So I really wanted there to be a way for me to chemically bond plastic to this body, and then I could just make the spikes out of plastic. But that's when I went down this huge rabbit hole of learning about plastics and about what different types of plastic exist. And it was at the end of this kind of rabbit hole that I found this. I found out that on every single piece of formed plastic, there are 2 letters that designate exactly what kind of plastic it is. For this, it was PE, which is polyethylene. What I first found out was that it is extremely difficult to find glue that will stick anything to it, and you cannot chemically bond it. I started to get kind of worried because I was thinking to myself, okay, at this point, like right at the beginning, this is doomed to failure because how on earth am I going to be able to stick spikes to this? But yeah, I thought, okay, look, I'll just put this to one side and I'll just get on with building the car itself. Yes, we just basically started to put the car together. It's always fun when you go online and you hear RC car enthusiasts tell you that this particular car, the one that I sliced my hand open trying to make, was designed for children. Yeah, look, it actually is a really very simple build, but still, maybe, I don't know, get an adult to help you, which I should have done. Also, the head of the driver, I kind of got a giggle for this because it was actually my daughter that noticed. The head of the driver itself, the one that comes with the model, is far more grumpy than the guy driving the car on the box. Yeah, but, you know, it wasn't going to matter because I was going to be covering his head in cloth anyway. Who cares? Okay, I'm going to take a little aside here just to mention that I am starting a Patreon for this channel. People usually say, you know, you can support me on Patreon or whatever if you want to buy me a coffee or something. But I think in my case it's more that you can buy me a cutting mat because I seem to tear through mine pretty quickly. So yeah, look, if you want to contribute to the cutting mat fund, this is one way to do it. But look, I get it. I know what it can be like to hear content creators constantly going on about Patreon or sponsors or whatever, and I really don't want to pester people with this. It's there if you want to support this channel in that way, but honestly, just having people sharing my work and engaging in dialogue in the comments section, or even just watching the rare videos that I make, like, it's all massively appreciated as it is. So please don't feel pressured into doing anything more than you already are. The Patreon is there if you want to go that extra step. There, done. I'm gonna shut up about it now and go back to the build. So I finished the car itself and it all seemed to run correctly, which meant facing back into the problem of how on earth I was going to stick cardboard spikes to what was it again? I always forget. Polyethylene. Yeah, this was going to be a challenge. Okay, hi. So a bit of an update here. I got up the next morning after after going again with the 2-part epoxy onto a sanded part of the body, and it stuck slightly better, but it still snapped off. So I was very ready then at that point, like literally just like an hour ago, a couple of hours ago, whatever, to say, okay, I'm gonna have to come up with a different solution. But then I remembered that I bought this Gorilla Contact Adhesive. Now, I noticed this in the shop one day, and the reason why I picked it up was because it said it was flexible. And so I grabbed it. I was like, ah, whatever, last chance. But, you know, what harm can it do? So I glued this, using this, to the body. And watch this. Go on, you can do it. Yes! It sticks. It's kind of coming off because I've done that too many times now. But it sticks. I can't believe it. I'm so thrilled. This has saved my bacon. Yeah, so I can continue forward now with a clear plan of what I'm gonna do. So yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think you can hear some of my excitement at just like stumbling across a glue that works amazingly well. I can't emphasize enough the punishment that I have put this thing through, and like it sticks so brilliantly. So it really did give me hope at that point that I'd be able to make this car and not have everything just completely collapse the second I tried to drive it anywhere. So then at that point I realized that I was going to need to start experimenting with forming the shape of the car. So the first thing I did was I cut away the wheel arches to try and reposition those to give it more of the profile and the kind of shape of the car from the film. This was obviously terrifying because, you know, once you make a cut, that's it. It's very difficult to fix things, especially considering the kind of plastic that I'm using. It's very difficult to glue stuff back into place again if I make a mistake. So yeah, I was a bit nervous at this point. I started to think about how I was going to make the shape of the grille at the front of the car, and it was really only at this point that it kind of dawned on me how tricky that was going to be, because I had absolutely no clue how to go about that. I did also think about how on earth I was going to make an interior and how tricky that was also going to be. Yeah, I still had a few hills to climb over, but I figured I'd get there eventually. So yeah, as I say, at this point I was getting really stuck on how to shape the front grille. I hadn't a clue what to do. I don't have any experience with like molding or shaping anything like that before. I considered shaping something out of foam, but I gave up on that idea pretty quickly. But then I thought of maybe beginning with the very front part of the grille by making it out of styrene rods that I just melted into shape with a lighter. I still had no idea how to expand that into a larger shaped piece of the housing of the grille itself. But yeah, that's when I thought of using a thin piece of cardstock cut to match the shape of the styrene rod. And that was kind of that was the first point really when I felt like I was kind of finally getting somewhere. It was still really wonky and it didn't sit right, but it was definitely a step in the right direction. So I added panels to the wheel arch to fill out some of the missing space that I had cut away. So it was a good opportunity to create something that looks like hastily welded together. So once I had kind of the basic shape at the front of the grille, I started using strips of card to fill out the rest of that curved shape of the grille housing. It looks really strange there, and it looks like it's kind of hodgepodge kind of built together, which it is, you know, let's get real. But at this point, I was just willing to do anything to achieve that look, and I was just kind of hoping that once it was painted up later on, that it wouldn't look completely out of place or that your eye wouldn't be drawn to it too much. But yeah, I'll let you guys decide on whether or not that was successful. I decided to remove the scooped like bumper thing on the underside of the car. It just didn't fit the shape I was going for. Part of it was structural, so I just cut off the part that I didn't need. I knew that I wanted some chains at the front somewhere, so this was the part where I began to experiment with the length of chain that I bought from a local charity shop. Usually I just steal old necklaces from my daughters, but they didn't have any left for some reason. So I had to actually go and source my own for once. I was kind of chuffed when I realized that the size of the screw that correctly fitted into these two holes at the front also fit inside the chain loops as well, so I knew that this idea might eventually work quite well. It's not on the original reference photo, but I don't know, I just think that rusted chains and this kind of look, this aesthetic go really well together, so I wanted to have a chain somewhere on the model. I know it doesn't match the car, but I think it's okay. So I tried to replicate those weird kind of teeth-like things that you can see here at the rear of the Buzzard car in the film. So I just used coffee stirrers, which I eventually just painted up. So I added more panels to the wheel arches to make it look like they had been bolted on. I used these little stickers almost, but they're like glitter, like bead things. They look really convincing as rivets, well, especially at this scale. So I just added a few of those just to kind of give it a bit more texture, something else to look at. So I added the front lights. I knew as well I wanted to use the original lights that came with the car and attach them to that front grille housing somehow. This was a challenge because the piece of card that I had used was very, very thin. There was absolutely no way I was going to be able to glue this light housing to it or like drill anything through. So what I had to do was I glued some styrene panels to the inside of the card to give me something to screw into. So you can actually see I've also added little bits of plastic inside the light housing here to give something for the screw itself to attach to. And I didn't know if this would work. I was worried it wouldn't be structurally kind of sound enough, and as soon as I went over a bump or something, it might come off, but it hasn't. It sits really, really tightly. So yeah, that worked out okay. So with the basic shape of the front grille in place, I wanted to add some spikes at this point to see if it would actually look like the car from the film. And it was one of those moments where, I'm sure you guys get it as well, like whenever you're making something and you're not really sure if you're doing the right thing, and you're being doubtful of what you're doing, but then you do this one little thing and you kind of look at it and it just kind of clicks in place and you're like, oh my god! That's kind of how I felt at this point. I thought, oh my god, once they get some rust effects on that's gonna look incredible. So yeah, that kind of gave me a lot of enthusiasm to continue. But that said, it was around this point that it started to dawn on me just how many cardboard spikes I was gonna have to make. But yeah, more on that later, I guess. So I did more sanding. I think I was just nervous that the paint wasn't gonna stick. Obviously, knowing about what kind of plastic this is. Oh, incidentally, if I had actually read the front of the box, if I had just looked at it properly, I would have noticed this. It is made from shock-resistant PE plastic material and cannot be painted. I seriously, I spent like half a weekend trying to research what kind of plastic this was made from. It's written on the front of the box. My god. And yeah, it cannot be painted. So, well, that's not strictly true because I did end up painting mine, but you most certainly can't just throw paint onto it because it will come off. But yeah, so I did some more sanding just in preparation for that. So then I began the process of making lots and lots of cardboard spikes. Again, it's just made out of 2mm cardstock. Yeah, and just gradually sticking them to the front of the car. I realized early on, I was just kind of sticking them wherever, but I realized quite early on that, in particular at the front part of the car here, it looked better to have them in little clusters of 3 or 4 spikes. It seemed to look a bit more natural than having just single ones all over the place. It just looked a bit weird. It just didn't look right. So while doing that, I also added some pieces of cloth soaked in PVA to fill out the rest of the shape of the grille housing. I know it looks weird here, but again, I was just kind of hoping that once it was all painted, it would come together a bit more. But at that point, I didn't know how to make that shape. So having a piece of cloth soaked in PVA just felt like a way to cheat my way around it. And I was just kind of hoping that painting it was going to be able to hide it. I started adding these kind of panel hubcap things to the front wheels to sort of experiment with trying to match the look of the movie. They're pretty straightforward. Again, it's just kind of 2mm cardstock cut into shape with a couple of spikes glued to it. So I did purchase other wheels, however the hex-shaped holes were damaged. So I had to separate the tires from the wheels, which was extremely difficult as they had been glued in place by the previous owner. Look, please don't do that if you are ever considering reselling them, especially if the holes are frayed, because they're useless. Come on, please don't do that. Like, the plastic had to be torn from the tires piece by piece. But yeah, eventually I got there, and these tires definitely look better than the stock ones that came with the car. Yeah, so added more spikes to the car, just piece by piece. So the glue that I mentioned in that little insert earlier, it's perfect, it works great, it's flexible, which I knew that I would need. But I didn't want to take any chances with anything coming off, so I was using lots more glue than I normally would have if I was using any other materials. But I kind of realized that it wouldn't really matter because it would kind of maybe look like it was like some welding that someone had used to attach the spikes to the car. Look, it was just more important that they stuck. Yeah. At that point, I kind of sat it to one side and started to make the interior. I had in principle, I guess, like overcome two of the biggest challenges that I thought that I would have in making this thing, and that was gluing the spikes, making the housing for the front of the grille, the shape of the car. The next big challenge would be to make the interior. But I gotta be honest, I was really looking forward to this part because it genuinely didn't seem like it would be that difficult. Obviously, I was completely wrong about that, but I did at least approach it with a ton of enthusiasm. So I started off with random parts, just things that actually came with the kit itself, plus the driver piece. This was obviously going to be the most important piece in shaping the driver of the vehicle. So I cut the driver out and I left this piece to connect to the car. I knew that like structurally that was going to be very important to do. But at this point I really wasn't sure how much of the body of this guy I was going to make. Like, was I going to make his legs? Would I make a lap for him? What will the bottom part of this interior actually look like? I wasn't sure at that point. I wanted to fill out the underside of the arms so that it would be easier to wrap cloth around them, just to make it look like an arm shape, because as you can see here, it's only half an arm. The underside of the arm doesn't exist. So I used straw filled in with modeling putty to finish rounding that shape off. I also built a torso out of card. At that point I decided against making legs. I figured that I would just kind of try and hide it somehow that he doesn't have any. I dry fitted it at that point and it felt like it could work. Obviously lots to kind of get even just the shape of the interior down, never mind all the little bits that would be inside there as well. But it was a first step in the right direction. I think it was at this point that I decided to make the crossbow. Look, I really apologize. I didn't get enough kind of photo and video of the process of me making it. I just came home from work one day and was all excited to get started doing it, and I just forgot. But yeah, it was basically made from this Warhammer 40k, I think it's McFarlane's toys, you call them. It's like this big giant Warhammer figurine, which I used to build this model a few years ago. And I didn't need the gun from it, and it was just sitting in my bits box. Now, the scale of it is far too big for this 1/10 scale, but I realized if I sanded some of the handle and stuff away, I'd be able to kind of get the basic look, and it came out well. The rest of it is kind of made from card and strips of plastic, and the bits at the front are just made from bent, very, very thin cardstock. It's a little bit fragile, but you know, the look came out okay. You can tell what it's supposed to be, especially when you sort of cross-reference it to the crossbow that is in the film. So I began to build the interior housing out of cardstock and thin strips of wood, but I realized I was overcomplicating it, so I just used a piece of card, just one single piece of card, for the base itself. Am I recording? Yes, I am. Okay, so look, I am not going to tidy this table until this project is finished. There's just no point. But yes, I wanted to just highlight, if I could very quickly, where I am with this part. I have ideas about what to do, but I think it's going to kind of require, like, I'm going to sort of glue these kinds of things here and there and stuff like that, and then I'm obviously going to be taking one or two of these, which came from there, into here somewhere, or maybe hanging on the wall or something, I don't know. But the thing that I'm dreading is that I've made the realization that because of the way that this is kind of set up, I'm going to have to paint all of this before I put it into that. Yeah, I'm not looking forward to that, to be honest, because, well, look, we'll see how it goes. But anyway, that's where I'm up to. Oh, yes, this little dinky dude is finished. He's cute. I looked through my bits box for some 3D printed pieces that were sent to me ages ago by a guy that I know. You might remember seeing these before during the very first video that I ever made, the bunker build, but these, like, would 100% they were the right scale for this. As soon as I saw these, I thought, oh my god, they're perfect for the interior of this. You can't see these on the finished build, but they do still definitely look like they belong there. I decided that he wasn't going to have legs. I would just make the outline of some legs and just paint it. Like anyone looking at the model, they're only going to see his torso anyway, so it didn't really matter if he had legs or not. I then cut the center panel out of foam and used some more 3D printed parts, and I built a little gear lever out of styrene. Honestly, out of everything on this vehicle, this might be my favorite piece. It just looks so dinky, and it just kind of looks, like, really convincing. Like, I mean, it is kind of funny, you know, like, my god, how many gears does this car have? But it's, like, one of the things that I've kind of learned with crafting is, especially for someone at my level, you don't have to make a replica of everything. You just kind of, sometimes, or quite often, it's enough to just have the suggestion of something. And this is the suggestion of a gear lever in a car. And that's enough. So yeah, I was really happy with how this turned out. I was really kind of proud of it, to be honest. I made some bedroll made out of an old blouse. I think I said to the missus, hey, you got any clothes you don't want? You mind if I cut them to pieces? And yeah, she handed me a bunch of stuff. So I just took something that had a bit of natural patterning to it and that might look visually interesting. And yeah, it's just cut into shape and secured with a cable tie. Yeah, I think it's cable tie. So I did make this old water pouch out of... Oh, yeah, I remember what that was. That was the underside of a children's, like, medicine spoon. Because, yeah, I thought it would make sense if he had a water pouch in his car. And this was kind of the closest approximation that I could make. And I'm gonna be honest, I didn't like it. I ended up not using it and putting some other stuff there. But, you know, whatever. At least I tried. So I dry fitted everything together. And, yeah. Something like that. Oh my goodness, I think I might have got the interior figured out. I still need to add like fabric to the top of this and lots of like stuff hanging down and torn fragments and things that kind of correspond to the reference photos. But oh, that's not quite right. That needs to go back a bit. But this looks okay. Obviously, he's not going to look like that. I think his head's going to fall off if I try. If I try and move this, this is just going to completely collapse. But let's do our best here. Yeah. Sufficient kind of greebly bits and detail and stuff. I think if I can glue all this in place, that would be a mighty fine looking interior if I can figure out how the hell to paint it. Yeah, alright, thumbs up. Nice. I began painting the interior using AK Interactive Primer Rust, just to kind of give like a base coat, and went over everything, just sort of dabbing different colors down. I wanted to have like an oily sort of effect. Just use some inks and washes and stuff, nothing really complicated. I also painted this fuel can kind of with a similar scheme, just base coated it, put some texture paint down to give something for the dirty down rust to adhere to, and then just came in afterwards with a bit more red just to bring up some of the original paint color. Okay, so got to a point here where I can't really put it off anymore. I'm gonna have to give this man clothes. This is gonna be really difficult. The rest of it's kind of looking cool. Looking suitably kind of grungy and whatnot. There's still lots left to do. But yeah, it's time. It's time to dress this dude. Where's his head? Over here somewhere. Again, I have no intention of tidying this up. I'm gonna have to, before I paint the actual car, I'm gonna have to tidy it, but whatever. For now, it stays the way it is. Yeah, so... Oh, ignore my thumb. Yeah, it's time to give this guy the top of his head. And... yeah, get him dressed. I'm gonna have to try and figure it out, but we'll get there. We'll get there. Bye-bye. I started making the head. I made the same mistake again that I always make. I tried making it out of styrofoam initially, but it melted because I tried to put putty on top of it. I don't know why I always keep making mistakes like this, but yeah, whatever. Hey, I have a brain. I ended up using just a piece of wood. I used strips of cloth material. They seemed to be the right scale. My first kind of mistake though was not dyeing the cloth first, but we'll get into that a bit more in a moment. I also applied the same cloth to the body and also wraps to the arms. The wraps were made from pieces of tissue paper coated in PVA. So the head itself, for the eyes and whatnot, and the mouthpiece, those are just little bits of just random whatever that I could find in my bits box that myself and my daughter looked through one day. We were just trying to sort of replicate the look of the guy actually driving the car in the film. And look, I know I haven't completely nailed it. Again, this is not supposed to be a replica at all. It's really just supposed to give the indication to anybody that has ever seen the film that they would recognize who it is. It does sort of form one of the most important visual elements of the build because your eye kind of naturally looks for whoever is in the driver's seat, and I know that it is pretty dank and slapped together and I'm not oblivious to how it looks, but I think it is enough to get across what I was trying to achieve. It's a million miles away from being anything professional, but like I've said in other videos, it doesn't really need to be. If it gets the effect across and I learn, well, crucially I learned something about crafting along the way, then I think it's a success. I had already decided that I didn't like the water pouch thing that I had made, so I wanted to have a piece of chain or rope with a grappling hook attached, and I had so much fun making this. I didn't really record most of the process of it, but it was very simple. It was just pieces of sprue, which I had sharpened off with a blade, and just melted with a lighter to get them sort of bended into the shape they need to be in, and just glued together, and then just kind of tie a piece of string to it. And it looks really cool. It's the right scale, it looks convincing. Unfortunately, you absolutely cannot see it whatsoever in the final build because it's kind of buried at the back and it's hanging off this wall, but still, it was fun to make. So then yeah, the driver was finished. I think this one looks much better than the original one that I had painted. Like honestly, I didn't get any video footage or photos of the first paint job of the driver because it looked really terrible, and I remember one day showing it to my daughter and she was like, yeah, it looks great, and I was like, I'm not happy with this at all, and I didn't know what to do, and she just put it so simply. She just went, well, if you don't like it, fix it. I was like, oh yeah, of course, fix it. So yeah, I came back in and sort of redid it all, and yeah, I think it looks better now than it did. So I added the rest of the spikes, which took forever, my god, but I did get them done. Okay, so a little update. I am sticking spikes, continuing to stick spikes, these things here made from cardboard, to the car, and it's coming out okay so far. It does unfortunately take roughly about 1,000 years to stick these things. Oh my god. Yeah, especially because I kind of have to keep repositioning them and stuff, realizing that they're not kind of following the right shape. But yeah, it's coming together. I don't have too much to do. If I can turn this around, oh, still on camera. So it's coming together. I still need to kind of reshape some of the spikes at the front and stick a few more down. I don't know if I've gone overboard on the top, to be honest, but I don't know. We'll see if it all kind of comes together. Hopefully it will. I decided I had gone overboard with the spikes in the roof, and I eventually removed quite a lot of them because it looked like instead of the car having spiked defensive measures, it looked like the car had a bad haircut. So yeah, I removed some of the spikes to make it seem a bit less busy. I also added PVA to the spikes just for some protection, which I knew the car was going to need once I started actually using this thing once it was finished. So it was time to apply a primer to the body of the car, which was a big moment for me, as I still wasn't sure if my sanding was going to be enough to get the primer to stick to the car, but also because I was getting closer to the really scary part, which was actually painting the car. I am not a strong painter at all, and I mostly just happy accident my way through painting, especially in the case of this car. So I applied the base coat, which was the same one as before, aka Interactive Primer Rust, and that's when I tried to come up with a paint scheme, or well, I wish I had properly come up with a paint scheme, because my first idea was to use Dirty Down Rust and then apply chipping medium on top of it, which was a terrible idea because Dirty Down Rust should always come last, because if you apply any other paints on top of that, you just lose the effect. Yeah, I kind of really struggled with how to paint this. Again, I'm not particularly experienced, so I find it really tough. What I decided to do was to apply the chipping effect first instead. But yeah, lots of problems with the painting, lots of coming back to it and adding different sort of effects here and there, because I wasn't really getting the results that I needed. Like in the footage you see here, this was nowhere near finished because I did end up coming back and adding stuff to it. I just wasn't happy with it, and it took a lot more kind of messing about with it than it really should have. I should have had a proper paint scheme planned in advance. I thought it was going to be easier than it was, I'll be honest. But, you know, it's part of the learning process, so it's all good. I then at that point made the front grille, and I was really excited to make this part because it kind of seemed really simple, which yeah, it turned out to be. It was just literally a piece of kind of shaped card. I went back to the reference photo from the car in the film just to do this kind of centerpiece thing, and the cables were just like, or the bits of wire, the grill itself, were just made from straightened pieces of wire, or well, bended pieces of wire, sorry, all glued in place, the big daub of glue up at the top, and then just painted up. It was really simple, but it added so much to the kind of look of the car. Again, it's one of the points of the car that your eyes go to, so I was glad it came out well. I glued the interior in place, which again was another kind of big moment. Just kind of felt like the whole thing was starting to come together. I also added pre-washed, pre-inked and painted cloth to the outside of the driver's cabin that I had deliberately frayed, trying to somewhat replicate the look of the film. I did decide though that the car was far too high, so I decided to lower it by cutting more parts away from the body, which was terrifying, because obviously at this point I didn't want to ruin the car by cutting away too much, but it definitely was necessary. It really did help to make it look a lot more like the profile of the car from the film. I dismantled the car then so that I could paint the shocks. Pretty straightforward paint scheme as before. Base coat. These pieces of plastic weren't made from polyethylene, so they were much easier to paint. And then it was just a case of going in then with some texture paint and dirty down rust. Very straightforward. Also did the same thing to the chassis, applied the texture effect as well. I painted up the wheels and the tires, and I added the spiked hubcap thingamabobs as well. And yeah, it was coming together. I'm finished, I think. I'm not immediately seeing anything that jumps out as need to be fixed. I'm not a huge fan of how I've painted these spikes. They look a little flat, but I can't repaint all those again. I lost the will to live. Everything else is looking okay. Yeah. I finished it! Oh my god. So it turns out there were still quite a few things that needed to be touched up and altered, but that was the day that I took it for its very first test drive. Yeah, that was a good feeling, that was a good experience. It's kind of funny looking back now at how careful I first was. Like, considering the absolute battering that I put the car through when I was filming the cinematic that I showed at the start of this video, like, I kicked that thing up and down the beach for about 6 hours over 2 days, and it held together really well, like, all things considered. So yeah, it's kind of funny to look at me being all cautious and careful here, but at that point I didn't know whether the car would just completely fall apart, but thankfully it didn't. I did also make this camera mount at one point as well. It was just made out of wood and Lego. The idea of that was so that I could attach my camera to the car itself to get some specific shots. As it turned out, I only really got, I think, one shot that actually made it into the cinematic trailer, but it was still a fun little side project though. So we did some test footage with a gimbal that I had purchased and my daughter's RC car. I was really intent on trying to make the cinematic look as good as I could get it. And like, I've never done anything like that before. I've never done like a film shoot or anything, or, you know, had to worry about shutter speeds, color correction and white balance, and like, I didn't really know what I was getting into, to be honest. It was so much work, but I really wanted to put as much into it as I could and learn as much from the experience as I could. So yeah, I purchased this little this gimbal from a camera phone. Yeah, we went out and kind of tested some different shots and stuff just to kind of get an idea of would it even be possible to kind of make a cinematic. And yeah, we got some good results, so it was enough to kind of proceed with it. I will mention that there was one point that was just, look, I know that you guys are probably a lot like me, where you make a project and all you are is fixated on the things that you don't like and the things you would do differently, and you kind of lose grasp of the bigger picture and you forget to kind of pay attention to the parts that actually came out well. I think it's just natural. But there was one really cool thing that happened when, after myself and my daughters had gone to see Furiosa, we came back home and we watched Mad Max Fury Road. And the point at which the Buzzard car appeared in the movie, all of us, we went, oh my god, like I've just made that. Like the thing was sitting behind me and I was like, oh my god, that looks exactly like, well, not exactly, but it looks a hell of a lot like the thing that I've just made. There was one shot in particular that I'm going to show here, where as soon as I saw it, I was like, that's, like, I've just copied that. Like, it's again, it's not perfect. It was never supposed to be a replica. But to kind of see the Buzzard car again in the movie, and then to turn around and look at this thing that I made, I don't know, I got a real kind of sense of pride, and like myself and the girls were laughing about it and stuff. It was a really, really good moment. It just felt like it had all been worth it, you know? So ultimately, I'll let you guys decide if you think that this was a successful project or not. I think opinion will vary there because it isn't perfect at all, but you know, it was never meant to be. Personally, just for myself, I think, like, I'm really proud of it. I think it looks really cool. It's something that really catches people's eyes. Like, for example, whenever, on the day that I first took this out for a test drive, we went to the beach and it was quite busy, and I was carrying this thing in my arms, and everybody was looking at it and being like, whispering to each other, and like little kids were going, oh my god, Dad, look at that. And it just, like, I'm a self-conscious person as it is, and it was just really weird to have all these people staring. But I guess that's the sign of having made something unique, I suppose. I don't know. Whatever. I am happy enough with the result. I think it looks weird and crazy and insane, and that's good enough for me. Alright, so that's the end of the video. Look, I just want to thank everybody that made it this far into the video. Thanks for watching, guys. Like, honestly, your feedback every time I make a video, I know I don't make them anywhere near as often enough as I would like to, but you know, life gets in the way. But whenever I do, there's always some really, really, really productive comments, which, please, look, I've said this in previous videos, but if you did see something in this video that you think could have been done better, please tell me, please reach out, please let me know in the comments, because I'm always getting this incredible feedback that I do genuinely take on board. Because again, I'm not a professional or anything, I'm still learning. So yeah, please give me your feedback. And yeah, do all the happy algorithm stuff, you know, like the video, share it, whatever. Subscribe if you would be interested in seeing more from this channel. Yeah, and that's it, I guess. I'm gonna show the cinematic trailer again just because it took bloody ages to make, so I may as well play it twice. But yeah, look, I'll see you in the next video. Hopefully it won't be too long. And yeah, take care of yourselves. Bye.